Bridging the school to work transition for youth. This will be all about the experiences of young people entering and navigating the workforce and the training and guidance services available to them. So while the pandemic has impacted all of us, young adults specifically have felt the negative impacts on all levels, and including economically, mentally, socially, professionally. So really the discussion today will cover how the skills ecosystem can better serve youth and young people as they transition from school to work, and the opportunities out there to advance and engage racialized and underserved youth, understanding the pandemic's impact in education and training, and how the rise of new technologies are reshaping the education landscape. So there's going to be lots to talk about today, and specifically as it relates to the Future Skills Center and where I work here at Magnet. So the Future Skills Center has over 60 projects that engage youth, and with the aim to address some of the challenges embedded in the school to work transition. So upskilling for in-demand careers and reskilling, labor shortages, et cetera. Magnet works closely with FSC on several of these projects as a technology partner, and we're providing the digital infrastructure that powers inclusive economic growth and workforce development. So Magnet's goal is to empower youth and help them find their next opportunity and succeed in a dynamic and ever-changing labor market and connect with industry. So we often work hand in hand on a lot of these initiatives. For today's conversation, Magnet has partnered with campus technology solutions provider, Orbis Communications, creating Canada's largest campus recruiting platform. It's very key to our conversation today. So through Magnet and through the Magnet network, one can get connected to that campus recruiting platform. It's great for students to connect with employers. With over 120 post-secondary institutions in our network, employers with a Magnet account can find student talent, apply for government funding to subsidize that very same youth employment. And it's been quite successful over the past few years, and there's a lot of demand for that. So hopefully we can speak more to everything that we've mentioned here. Please visit our website to learn more, and a colleague has added the link in the chat. Great. So next up, okay, we have Rochelle De Harry, who will provide a deeper dive into the challenges and solutions currently facing many young adults in their transition to work life and early career prospects. We will then hear from a panel of leaders through a discussion moderated by Elise Watkins, a strategic initiative consultant for the Future Skills Center. And then there will be a short Q&A that happens after there. We are excited to include a panelist networking reception shortly following the Q&A. And this will be a series of breakout rooms featuring each of the panelists. So you'll get an opportunity to find your way around there. It is a space for everyone here today to reflect on the session themes and really just have an opportunity to unmute yourselves, engage with the panelists, ask them questions, share your experiences and insights, explore and network rather with others in the group breakout rooms of your choosing. So with that, I'm thrilled to introduce our next speaker. Rochelle De Harry is a research and evaluation analyst at Future Skills Center. Her research interests include the future of work, digital economies, and international trade. Rochelle earned a master's degree from the Monk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy at the University of Toronto with a specialization in global markets. So thank you, everyone. And Rochelle, over to you.
Okay, thank you so much for the kind introduction, Nisreen. And I'm happy to be here today to talk with you all about school to work transitions. Now, this is one of the most exciting and anxiety-provoking moments of a young person's life. This is a time where young people are tasked with going off into the world to seek out work that is meaningful to them, that aligns with their skills, their goals, their values. And they are also seeking economic independence. Now, they have been preparing for and anticipating this moment for a long time, for years. And let's recognize that it takes a lot of courage to go out into today's labor market. Now, in good news, today's Canadian youth are actually more educated than any previous generation. we see more and more young people are attaining more and more advanced degrees. And this is great news in terms of school to work transitions, because worldwide and in Canada, we know that education is associated with a greater likelihood of getting a job, earning more in that job, and finding a job that we would consider high quality. So those are those jobs that provide, for example, benefits, steady hours, good workplace culture, and still autonomy. So let's think of education as providing a boost when you're making that school to work transition. But even so, despite this rising level of educational attainment, we see a lot of young people still really struggle with finding work after school. And I would say that the issues occur in three main areas. The first is education itself. We know that some young people struggle with accessing or completing their education, often because of personal or financial restraints. And we know that those with an education level of high school or less are much more likely to be unemployed. So this is an issue in terms of making that school to work transition. Second issue area is negative employer attitudes and stereotypes about young people, which research suggests are particularly pronounced against those with lower levels of education or those from equity-seeking groups. So even if we were to equip these young people with all of the right skills, they're still going to experience barriers to labor market entry. Now, the third issue area, and I would say this is a big one, is the labor market itself, which presents a lot of challenges to young people in particular. So, for example, young people tend to get hit really hard by recessions and economic shocks. A recent study by the Future Skills Center and the Environics Institute found that over the pandemic, young people were more likely to become unemployed, to lose hours of work, or to lose income. Now, this is a pattern we've seen over multiple recessionary periods. It's nothing new. And part of the reason is that a lot of firms follow a last in, first out principle when they're making layoffs. So if you were the last into the firm, you're more likely to be the first out. Third feature of the labor market is that it is shifting very rapidly in terms of its skill demands and the types of jobs that are available. And that's because of macro level shifts in technology, globalization, demography, and so on. Things that, young people are just, that's the card that they've been dealt. And that makes career carving really difficult and unpredictable, especially when you're early career, and even more difficult for young people who don't have access to professional networks and family connections that could help them secure jobs. This is what we might call social capital. Third feature of the labor market is it's grown a lot more precarious since the 1980s, and young people are more likely to be represented in those precarious jobs. So those are jobs that are low quality, part-time, or temporary, that don't provide a lot of job or economic security necessarily. And we know that for young people, a lot of their, foots into the labor market, so to speak, are in the form of, for example, low-paid internships that we might consider precarious, but can give young people valuable experience that helps them advance in their career over the long term. However, this can create a divide between young people who can afford to live in precarity and with lower wages for a constrained period of time versus those who cannot because of immediate financial constraints. So this begs the question of how do we build bridges for young people so they can make smoother transitions from school to work, and critically, how do we get them over that bridge more quickly? And timing is a key factor here because we know that a prolonged school to work transition time can have negative long-term effects on employment and wages. Now, speaking as myself, I'm a 2020 pandemic grad. I graduated into a very hostile market, and I do remember that when I was looking for a job, it was very much like I could hear the tick of the clock every week that passed by. Now, not only is that very stressful for a young person to deal with, but for some people, particularly those who are economically disadvantaged. It can force them into navigating some very difficult trade-offs between finding a job on the one hand, any job that will pay some of their bills, and finding the right job on the other, and which might involve waiting it out and going longer without that income. So how have school to work transitions been approached today? Governments at the federal, provincial, and territorial levels have made a number of investments into programs that subsidize the creation of entry-level jobs and that fund skill development opportunities and career services for young people. These are what we would call active labor market policies targeted to young people. Likewise, post-secondary institutions recognize that workforce transitions are vital. And what they often do is they try to facilitate them through experiential learning components, co-ops, and facilitating professional development training for students. Employers also play a crucial role. And we know that in a tight labor market, employers are more willing to consider investing in young people to meet their labor needs. Now, the Future Skills Center has recognized 8 core enablers of smoother and faster school to work transitions, which you can see on the screen. And they are all interconnected. So skills and the ability to signal them, education and credentials, professional networks, available job and work integrated learning opportunities, wraparound supports, information, so labor market information, for example, and career guidance. And as I said, these are all interconnected. So for example, investments into building skills in young people will only go so far if there aren't jobs available. So it points to the importance of a stacked approach. So taking all of this into recognition, the Future Skills Center has invested in over 60 projects which address young people as a target population. The Learning Bulletin that we just released focused on 8 of these projects that are testing solutions and exploring around a range of learning questions. And I have limited time to go over them today, so please check out the Learning Bulletin, which will be linked in the chat. However, just to give a snapshot, one of the learning questions we're exploring is how the skills ecosystem can increase rates of youth participation in education, which, since we know education is an enabler. And here we have projects which are working to reduce the cost of education, such as the Zero Fee project in Drayton Valley, Alberta, and also with approaches that increase enablers like essential skills, confidence, and motivation so that young people can complete their education. Second learning question we're exploring is how educational institutions can better prepare young people for the world of work. And here we have projects that are embedding skills development as an explicit outcome in the classroom, and another project which is working to jointly develop training curricula between academia and industry. And then another learning question we're looking at is how young people without experience can gain relevant work experience. So that classic question. And here we have a project that is providing paid work integrated learning opportunities to Black youth working in STEM fields. Another question that we're exploring is how can we encourage employers to hire and invest in excluded youth? And here we have a program that is pre-training young people according to employer needs and working very closely with employers. Final question in this learning bulletin is how can we better integrate services to support young job seekers? Because the network or the availability of services is often laid out in a kind of complicated and dispersed network. So Project Integrate experimented with integrating some of these services digitally. So to wrap up, skills are important for young people, but we need to be a little careful and have some nuance in how we frame this issue. Young people are skilled, they are capable, and they are eager to learn. Just as important as developing their skills is increasing recognition of those skills, of seeing the value of investing in them, and creating healthy labor markets where they have ample opportunities. So with that, we have a distinguished panel of guests ahead who will be discussing some of these issues and more coming up. And it is my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Elise Watkins, who is a strategic initiatives consultant at the Future Skills Center. She will be moderating the next portion of our event with the panelists. Now, Elise has dedicated much of her professional life to working with both national and provincial governing bodies to enhance education, skills development, and equity across Canada. Elise has authored and co-written several works on various education, policy trends, and issues. She is currently a Doctor of Education candidate at the University of Toronto and specializing in international educational leadership and policy. So thank you for tuning into this presentation, and off to you, Elise.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Rochelle, for your presentation and your kind introduction. It is now my pleasure to introduce our wonderful and esteemed panel for today's conversation. First, we have Dr. Adetola Adesida. He is the co-director of the Elite Program for Black Youth. Dr. Adesida is a professor and divisional director of orthopedic basic science research in the Department of Surgery at the University of Alberta. He completed his doctoral studies at the School of Pharmacy, University of Manchester, and did postdoctoral training at the Wellcome Trust Center for Cell Matrix Research and the University of Manchester and Harvard Medical School. He's a recipient of fellowship awards from Harvard Medical School and the Marie Curie Fellowship Program of the European Commission. He's also a recipient of the Collaborative Exchange Prize of the Orthopedic Research Society. He holds several patents and has published over 70 peer-reviewed papers in cartilage tissue engineering and regenerative medicine. Welcome, Dr. Adesida.
Thank you very much, Elise. It's good to be here.
Excellent. Our next panelist is Akosua Alagratinam. Akosua is the Executive Director at First Work, Ontario's Youth Employment Network. Prior to joining the organization, Akosua worked as a senior public affairs professional, primarily focused on policy affecting marginalized communities and youth. During her tenure with the Provincial Minister of Children and Youth Services, Akosua led the Youth Justice and Youth Opportunity Policy and also worked directly with multiple agencies as well as frontline staff to advocate for marginalized youth. With over 6 years of experience in government, combined with 7 years as the board representative for the Region of Peel Women's Centre interim place, she is an established driver of effective policymaking, communications, public and government affairs, and community engagement. Akosua currently sits on the board of the Canadian Coalition of Community-Based Employability Training. Welcome, Akosua.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Excellent. Our third panelist is Dr. Uzo Anucha. Dr. Anucha is an associate professor in the School of Social Work at York University, the York Research Chair in Youth and Contexts of Inequity, and the academic director at Youthrex. Uzo conceptualizes her community-engaged research as a community dialogue that is centered on equitable opportunities with community stakeholders during all phases of the research process. Her research projects emphasize multi-methods, multifocal research to make space for multiple perspectives. Uzo's intellectual leadership of 3 large externally funded initiatives over her academic career, Social Work in Nigeria, Assets Coming Together for Youth, and Youth Research and Evaluation Exchange, Youthrex, has provided her with excellent opportunities to learn and understand how to collaborate equitably with a broad multi-sectoral alliance of stakeholders in tackling complex issues of equity and access locally and globally. Over the last decade, Uzo's research agenda has focused on critical youth work. Welcome, Dr. Anucha.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Well, it's my pleasure to kick off this conversation, and we know that the school to work transition is a vital process in a young person's life. And this panel was brought together because of your expertise and connections in supporting young people through their experiences in the labor market. So for our first question, could you please tell us about your work through Youthrex, First Work, and the experiential learning in innovation, technology, and entrepreneurship elite program? First, we'll start with Uzo to discuss Youthrex.
Thank you. Youthrex, the Youth Research and Evaluation Exchange, we are an Ontario-based province-wide initiative based at the School of Social Work at York University. We are mainly funded by the Ontario Ministry of Children, Community and Social Services, with contributions from my research here that is held, funded by York University. Our mission is really to make research evidence and evaluation practices accessible and relevant to Ontario's grassroots youth sector. Mm-hmm. I think one of our most widely used services is the Knowledge Hub. The Knowledge Hub has over 1,800 resources that the main focus is to try and make evidence more accessible to youth workers, because, and I'm sure people know this already, sometimes a lot of the research we produce in research centers, post-secondary education institutions are not very accessible. So within the Knowledge Hub, you'll find research summaries. We'll take an academic article and distill it into 2 pages. We have evidence briefs that will pull together the actionable or practicable findings from research projects. So we like saying that the Knowledge Hub has everything on youth work in one place and is open 24/7. Looking forward to having more conversations.
Wow, that's incredible. And I'm looking forward to checking out that list of resources right after our call. Next, Akosua to talk about First Work.
Thank you. First of all, it is a pleasure to be here representing First Work. So First Work is a membership organization that represents over 96 employment service providers across Ontario, most of which are youth serving. We bring together providers of youth programming and employment services, business leadership, academia, and government to develop and advance solutions for youth employment. Our goal at the core of our mandate is looking at bridging the gap between those furthest away from employment and often are most vulnerable to employment opportunities in the space. We have 4 main goals, which is advocacy, research, training, and offering convening opportunities. So often, and as Uzo had mentioned, research is very inaccessible, especially to our frontline staff when we're looking at capacity building. So oftentimes we try to take that research and see what are some of those practical elements that we can deliver, and what are some of the training opportunities that research advises us on that we can equip our frontline staff to better serve youth in our space. So we help build the capacity of those frontline serving youth through innovation, like technology. I know we're going to go into this a little deeper, but through other tech platforms, through communities of practice, to talk about how we best support our job seekers. And of course, how do we continue to utilize what government takes with respect to policy and look at what some of those delivery implications are on the ground, because oftentimes what we think of in government as, unprecedented policy might appear very different when it's practically delivered. And oftentimes all the research that we accumulate and we deliver are done through hearing and amplifying youth voices, sharing expert voices from our front line, and of course, getting employer perspective on how we build our talent pipelines.
Thank you so much, Akosua. And you've highlighted some of the big themes that we've heard from Rochelle's presentation, and I'm sure will be part of the conversation moving forward. So thank you for telling us about First Work. And next, Adetola to talk about the ELITE program. Oh.
Thank you very much, Elise. It's really exciting to be here. So I'm going to give you just a snapshot into ELITE program. So ELITE is really an abbreviation of experiential learning in innovation, technology, and entrepreneurship for Black youth. So essentially, it creates opportunities for youth to have hands-on experience in different settings. That could be in academia or in industry. So, and it's really focused on STEM, so science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, mainly for Black youth in the ages 15 to 22. So we would have high school students as well as undergrad students that are probably in between, just about to go to maybe graduating, or maybe they're going to their third year or fourth year, something like that. So it creates these opportunities for them to basically experience what they might be getting outside when they go for work. So that transition from school to work, or alternatively for the high school students, they get experience in postgraduate education. So that's essentially what we create. We create those opportunities for them to basically have, work with professors that are Blacks, that could be mentors to them, as well as industry leaders that can help them actually transition very nicely as well into the industry setting. So essentially, that's what Elite program does. It supports these Black youth and it gives them hands-on experience to basically know what to do when they go out there. And the other aspect of Elite program that is really good is that we have that coaching series where we give them some sort of counseling to help them navigate the process of some of the anti-Black racism that goes on. So we give them those tools to basically be able to deal with those issues when they're confronted with those issues when they go into the workplace or go into the postgraduate education settings, for example. So these are some of the things that the Elite program basically offers to Black youth, as well as giving them aspects of entrepreneurship, because not everybody wants to go to high school for postgraduate education, for example, post-secondary education. So it enables them to be able to have some aspects in entrepreneurship, have those skill sets, and if they come up with some innovative ideas, for example, maybe from some of the things that they've been exposed to during the training or the learning experience, then we can also support them in getting into that space of maybe setting up a startup, for example. So those are some of the things that Elite program essentially does for the Black youth in those age groups.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing, Adetola. And I remember hearing about the coaching component of the program and the focus on youth mental well-being and mental health being a really important component of that, and looking at the multifaceted ways that we can support youth in bridging this gap between school and work. So thank you, all three of you, for those really wonderful overviews. So in thinking about our next question and thinking about youth voices, what do you think young people consider to be the most critical priority in improving the skills training system and supporting their transitions from school to work? I'll start with Akosua to kick us off in terms of what you think some of those most critical priorities would be for young people.
And honestly, to answer this question, because First Work, we have a youth council, an Aspire Council that does youth-led work, and they put a focus group together to ask this particular question. Wow. So first job to building a career, and for Youth Loud and Clear, it was access to quality employment-based resources, and that is a priority for youth. There is a plethora of skills training across, whether it be, micro-credentialing or badging, or even like through our post-secondary education system. But getting access to free training, easy to upskill, accessible training is not always possible. And for the youth that we tend to speak up more for, it's those youth that don't necessarily have access to internet, computers, and therefore online resources as a means of accessing these services. So oftentimes it means accessing employment services or libraries or other opportunities where free resources are offered. So that has been a huge priority with respect to, aiding in improving the skills training system? How do we create that access? And then on another tier, it's that network opportunity, right? The opportunities you get at university with respect to the sheer network and volume of professors, of skilled intellectuals, of folks that can open the doors for you, for your future, for your career, are not always readily available for those youth that aren't in those systems, right? So how do we give them the opportunity to access networks, to access resources? And that's something that has been critically vocalized as a part of making that training system. And it's very much hands-on training, right? We see that in apprenticeships, but not, there's the availability of apprenticeships across every career is minimal to null at various points. So how do we give them the opportunity to really explore and offer that career exploration? It's done in high school at a very minimal level. How do we increase and expand that more? So those have been some of the critical things that they've vocalized.
Oh, thank you very much, Akosua, for highlighting those quality resources and networking being very salient for students. Adetola, what do you think are the most critical priorities for youth in the ELITE program?
I think, some of the comments that we've had from some of the youth has to do with, I'm seeing you, for example, as a prof in surgery, doing what you're doing. I never thought that was possible for me. So when you kind of mentor them and you show them the ropes, it's a lot easier for them to see that happening in their own lives as well. So I think just being able to see, touch, feel and experience, and having somebody that looks like them to tell them that they can do it makes a big difference. So it was a major eye opener for several of the youths that I have, for example, in my research lab, and seeing some of the networks that I was able to introduce them to, that it can be done. There are ways to do that. So that really helped, and it introduced them to a kind of ecosystem where there are other people like them are in that space. So it's not that they're not alone.
Right.
So that made a big difference to, majority of the youth. So the program has been running now for 2 years. So we're in our second year, and it looks like the intakes are actually increasing. So, so that is the conversation that we tend to have with them, that I didn't know this was possible because you've given me so much opportunities to see things that I didn't think was possible. And it seems to be the same message from all the interns, whether they went to industry or went to some of the government agencies, or they're in another academic lab, for example. It's the same thing, that now I can see myself doing this because somebody that looks like me is doing that. So, yeah.
Thank you very much, Adetola. And that's a really powerful message, to think of possibility through representation and through that mentorship, and to see the network. So thank you very much for that. Uzo, what do you think is the most critical priority?
Definitely, I was smiling when Akosa was talking, and when Adetola was, when they were saying, and I kept on nodding my head.
Yeah.
All the research we've been involved with, the same findings have consistently come out, right? One of the things, I would like to kind of emphasize based on their 2 points is the important thing is the context, of these work experiences for you, right? It has to be within a context that allows them to expand their notion of what's possible. So when you look at youth who have positive experiences, of youth who've been able to leverage that, is because the context of the work experience or the volunteering has allowed them to expand the notion of what's possible. So for a couple of years before Youthrex and By the way, shout out to you to First Walk. First Walk was one of the founding partners of Youthrex in 2014, and they were also part of the project we did for several years within the Jane Finch community with youth. And as part of that, we'll bring youth from Jane Finch to York University for them to learn with our own students. And one of the things we heard over and over again from them was how important it was for them to be within an academic environment, to be able to imagine other things that that they could do. So yeah, definitely the findings from Elite and from First Walk are similar to what we've also learned. And then just quickly to add to that, because sometimes people are like, yeah, youth should volunteer or they should do an internship, but without recognizing the barriers that prevent you from. So making sure that such opportunities are paid is actually very important, because then it removes a very important barrier. So rather than having a youth doing a work that is kind of dead end, that doesn't contribute, because they need to do that for economic reasons, they can do something else that helps them to build their skills, that gives them opportunity. That's
That's such an important point about paid internships, and especially during the pandemic, and we've heard a lot in the media about the increased impacts of COVID health and economic crises, especially on marginalized and racialized and Black and Indigenous youth. These are really important, critical priorities to keep our eye on and to think about with respect to bridging that transition between school and work for all students. For the next question, and thinking along the lines of the pandemic, and we've seen this over the last few years, but especially during the pandemic, the rise of new technologies and digitization in reshaping education and skills development for both learners and educators. And how are these new technologies changing the landscape, and what are the areas of improvement and opportunities for integrating digital learning? First, let's start with Akosua.
So there has been a sheer volume of digital platforms. And some of them, looking back on my own youth, I'm like, I wish I had these platforms available to me, right? So you have LinkedIn Learning, Coursera, there's Microsoft badging programs as well. And then the networking platforms like 1,000 Coffees, where you can pick CEOs or EDs to meet with and just ask them, about their career journey and start that conversation. And on the other end, it's the social media platforms that like YouTube and TikTok that provide you quick, easy to digest tutorials. And they have these on various interviewing, job coaching, if you will. But there is always there is an increased access, for them and to integrate this and make it more successful, if you will, because a lot of research has told us that mixing this with practical application, or mixing learning with practical application, is where you retain that learning and where you can actually use it or write in a resume that, I have experience in X, Y, and Z. And that isn't as easily available, and it isn't as easy on your fingertips. So when it comes to technology, first, it's the barrier to accessing technology, right? So not everyone has that access. The barriers to smooth career exploration, it's all, and I will say this because there are platforms that, you have to sign in, utilize the platform, but then you have to sign in to, let's say, Indeed Jobs to apply for another platform, right? So there's various barriers to make this career exploration as smooth as possible. And that paired up with on the job, or experiential learning, it would be, and where we can see that collaboration, or where we can see the marrying of the two, would be that perfect aspect, and also where you have access to free and utilizable platforms, right? Because every platform, and I'll say Coursera, when I was a youth, was free, but isn't completely free now, right? And so that exists everywhere. So how do we make that as accessible for everyone as we can get. And this goes on both sides, because if you're part of, you know, a rich corporation that can fund you being able to educate your youth, that would be great. But oftentimes, especially the people that I represent, it's those community service organizations that are, you know, grant to grant funded, right? And so often their projects are based on how much funding they have to access various supports. And if they don't have those resources, the people that are trying to access those resources are limited themselves. Right. And that's where I'm gonna pause on my end.
Oh, really, really,
yeah.
Those, I mean, I think you're presenting the layers that act as barriers in the process, and the positive ways that technology and digitization can be leveraged. However, there are those barriers that we have to be mindful of. Adetola, coming from a STEM background, how are you seeing technology changing the landscape?
I think the very first thing that comes to mind is the fact that it removes the borders. So you essentially can interact with people across the world through this kind of technologies. And it creates these communities where youth can find people that look like them in another country, and they can share ideas, their perspectives on different things, and also maybe even have collaborations that could lead to something that can be transformational. So when technology is used in that kind of way, it becomes something that is much more collaborative, engaging, and transforming. So, and in the area of STEM anyway, one of the things that we see is that the library really is at your, fingertips. Mm-hmm. So you're able to read, there's lots of volumes of things that are put, in the virtual space, and then you have access to those kind of science and technological materials just at your fingertips, and then you can read all those things and use that to inform yourself about some of the things that you may want to do, maybe explore, for example, in the lab or through some of the partnerships that you have with your mentors in the industry, for example. So it's created that space where people can really just engage without the borders in that context. And, in my area of work, for example, in surgery, just being able to improve dexterity in terms of playing games, for example, it really improves your surgical skills, right? So either you're playing a game or you're trying to do some trivia or something like that, it really, really helps in terms of some of those things that might be useful in terms of surgery. So technology in that kind of way has been very transformational from some of the use that I've been working with in my research space. So I see that quite a lot. So it's just been great that you can have those collaborations across borders.
I love that point of removing the borders, and also about transferable skills, how the dexterity can be improved for surgery. I think that's great. Uzo, how are you seeing technology changing the landscape?
I'm happy that when you asked the question, you included not just for youth, but also for whether youth workers, educators, professionals, because we also do have work to do in that area. To add to the points that Akosa and Detola have already made, this is an area where it also gives us an opportunity to acknowledge and kind of build on the competence of youth, because there are a lot of youth who are just more amazing in using all the newer technology and apps than adults. So this is an area where it becomes possible that they can actually lead and contribute and have that sense of ownership. I keep laughing because I didn't start using I never had a cell phone till the pandemic hit. So I got my, I started using a cell phone in 2020. People roll their eyes and they can't believe them. So I'm always like, now I'm like amazed. I look at all the apps. I'm like, oh my God, you can do it. And then my kids, they roll their eyes. They're like, everybody knew that except you, kind of. Yeah, so technology, there's all these different potential, it provides, but also thinking about the potential for youth to lead. And there's, a really cool program that one of the public libraries have where they bring in youth and they support seniors with technology and, show them how to use, because they are so, it's almost like a second language for some youth. They're also keeping in mind the barriers that some youth then have. So you go to some high schools and you have all the latest technology, public schools, right? Because not all public schools are created equal in Canada, although it's supposed to be a public system. Then you go to some public schools and all the equipment, they are broken down, they are outdated, and it almost feels like such a clear injustice, because without that, it's difficult to keep up with the rest of the world. So yeah, yes. I think we need to pay attention to technology, pay attention to who has access to what, pay attention to look for opportunities for youth to be able to lead and contribute. Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. And I think that's a really great summary point for what we've been hearing across this conversation about balancing the positives, the advantages, but also ensuring that we're dismantling the barriers at the same time and ensuring that equity of opportunity for all learners. This has been a really wonderful discussion, and I know the chat has been including some questions. So I'm going to take a quick look over here to see. Okay, we have one question here about, are schools doing enough to assess and develop social and emotional skills? And I know we talked about all the different experiences that youth can have, especially between that transition between school and work. So Adetola, what do you think about how schools are doing with respect to social and emotional skills?
Well, first, it depends on the school.
Yeah, good point.
Not all schools are equal. I would say, just looking at the kind of Black cohorts that I've been coming in contact with, I don't think there's been enough being done. And based on some of the conversations that I've had with some of my interns, representation is obviously big, is a big thing. So, this is something that is historically a problem, and I think is still continuing. So I trained in the UK, and one of the very first things that I realized was there weren't many people that looked like me in the positions, that were teaching me. So aspiring to be that was challenging. And it seems that is still lingering on today. So I think our schools really need to be very diverse in the representation, whether it's in the STEM area, whether it's in the arts area. I don't think it needs to be just focused on one particular area. I think it needs to be just well spread out, so that when the youth see people that look like them in those positions, it's really easy for them to say that I can be that. So that's very key. So I think our school systems really needs to improve on that. And yes, I'm in university. I'm the only Black professor in surgery. Right. So, and it's like, oh, wow, how did you manage to do that? So that is still ongoing. I think we can improve on that with all the policymakers, and so that needs to be dealt with. But we also need to create tools, give the youth tools to, they need to learn how to be able to deal with some of the emotions that comes with that, and also let them know like what we're doing in the elite program, for example, is that we've got this space. You can come into this space. You can learn some of these things that will give you the skill sets that will position you well when you go out there, so you can be that, whatever you want to be.
Yes.
You know, and if you don't know within the elite program, if we don't have the resources within elite program, for example, to help them, maybe we know within our network, for example, somebody that can, you know, help them, and we just move them forward, that you can be what you want to be. So I think giving them the tools to be able to deal with some of the things that kind of negatives, and how to deal with that and move forward is really helpful. The other thing I like to say as well is, I think it's really very late in the school system to really, you know, what I want to say is that you learn all the things you need to learn at school. And then it's like you are now learning how to apply for a job.
Right.
I think that's wrong. I think learning about a job should be part of the education in the school. Yeah, that needs to be integrated into that. Entrepreneurship needs to be integrated into the school system. All of those things needs to be there. So it's not that now that they're about to graduate, they need to start learning those things. That's wrong. I think they need to have all the tools in the school before they start applying for the jobs.
Right.
So I think we need to start thinking about things in a kind of reverse order, so to speak, so that when they get to that stage in their lives, they're ready. They know what the barriers are, what the challenges are, and they know how to navigate those pathways so that they can get and do the things that they need to do. So our school system is actually failing, I think, our youth in some ways. I think we need to change some of those dynamics.
Thank you for sharing those important points. Koswa, I think I see you
like
nodding a lot.
Yeah.
Yes.
I want to add to that because he's right on so many levels, but the one key part is employment service providers are funded by government, school boards are funded by government. There's an opportunity, like, why is it only on schools to make sure this is happening, but more like an integrated approach? When you're talking about community development, this is what service providers deliver, right? They deliver soft skills. They try, like, when we talk about resume building and coaching, and what you see is your transferable skills, like you have led a student club. What does that mean in terms of transferable skills, in terms of leadership, communications? Right. So community service providers have often, to the best of their ability, tried to work with schools, but I think that there needs to be, and this is, sometimes government driven, oftentimes community driven. So there is a need to be more integration with community in terms of ensuring that you're supporting and providing those wraparound supports for the whole person, right? And not just waiting for them to go out and search for it, because that accessibility starts there, right? And where you disengage with those youth, and those youth that, may drop out of high school and don't make it into university, how do we engage them at a pivotal point to allow those services to happen? And to Dr. Adesaida's point, it should start earlier. Like civics and careers, I believe, starts in grade 10. We should be talking about soft skills, the importance of communication skills much earlier in your life, because there has been a recent study, especially by, Sarek and Veronix had done a study with employers, and employers had highlighted that they'd rather hire a person with really good soft skills and then teach them on the technical skills rather than the other way around, because sometimes, depending on the job, it's just easier
Right.
because finding those people with soft skills are so much harder.
That those are such important points, especially thinking about policy and the role of government in shaping education and employment landscapes. Uzo, one related question, and thinking about Youthrex and research and how we are talking about these different skill sets, do you see a disconnect between skill sets students are getting from education and the realities of today's labor market?
I agree with both Professor Adetola. We should also not just be too quick to give employees a pass, right? When they say things like, "Oh yeah, soft skills are more important than hard skills," what do they mean by soft skills?
Yeah.
Whose soft skills? When they say communication is, how are they defining that? When they talk about fits, because one of the ways that the labor market discriminates against certain individuals is the whole concept of fits. It then becomes who looks like you, who you can see yourself.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's really, but definitely, I'm not saying that those soft skills are not important. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that
yes,
you might still do all that, and the labor market, if there isn't a way that we can expand how we understand who belongs where, who fits in where, certain, young people will keep being shut out, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. That's such a great point.
Yeah.
What do we mean? But how do we define that, and whose definition are we using? Really important considerations. This has been an absolutely rich and inspiring conversation. Thank you to Akosua, Adetola, and Uzo for your insights.